The wire taped beneath my silk blouse felt like a branding iron against my ribs, hot, itching, and terrifyingly foreign against my aging skin. I was 69 years old, a woman who had spent her life baking casseroles for sick neighbors and arranging altar flowers on Saturday mornings. Yet here I was, sitting in the lion's den, forcing a smile at the man who had promised me salvation while picking the pockets of widows. "You came back," Pastor Cross said, his voice dropping to that low, vibrating register that used to sound like comfort, but now sounded entirely like a threat. He moved around his mahogany desk, his shadow stretching long across the Persian rug, effectively blocking the only exit to the hallway. He didn't sit down. He stood over me, smelling of sandalwood and expensive oud cologne, a scent that was too heavy for a Tuesday morning and too suffocating for a church office. The air in the room was thick with the humidity of a Virginia summer and the weight of old secrets. I resisted the urge to press my hand against my chest to check if the recording light was still blinking. If he found it, if he saw the square outline of the device beneath my cardigan, or noticed the tremor in my hands, I knew, with a certainty that chilled my blood, that I would not walk out of this church alive. He had too much to lose, and as I had learned over the last terrifying week, a man of God who has fallen from grace is far more dangerous than any common criminal. "I had to come back," I lied, my voice trembling just enough to be convincing, using my age as a shield. "I couldn't leave things broken between us, Pastor. My daughter, she has been filling my head with such noise, but I know where my spirit belongs." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. It was a practiced expression, a muscle memory of kindness that didn't quite cover the predator underneath. It was the smile of a wolf watching a lamb limp back into the fold, calculating exactly how much meat was left on the bone. "Doubt is a heavy burden, Lucy," he said, stepping closer, invading my personal space until I had to crane my neck to look at him. "But I knew you would return. The sheep always know the shepherd's voice." I gripped my purse, feeling the hard edge of the recorder through the leather, and prayed that my heartbeat wouldn't be audible on the tape. To understand why I was sitting there, risking my life for a confession, you have to understand the grip this man had on us. It didn't start with violence. It started with hope. It all began 6 months earlier on a humid Sunday morning in Richmond, Virginia, where the air was so heavy with moisture, it felt like a wet wool blanket had settled over the city. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, threatening a storm that never quite broke and trapping the heat against the pavement of the historic district. I sat in my usual pew at Grace Light Church, a fortress of red brick and white pillars that stood proudly on Monument Avenue, flanked by ancient oak trees that dripped with Spanish moss. Inside, the sanctuary was a refuge of cool air and polished wood, smelling of beeswax and hymnals. The envelope trembled in my arthritic hands. Inside was a check for $5,000. It was drawn from my husband Richard's memorial fund, the very last piece of him I had left to give to this world. Richard had been gone for 3 years, and the grief still hit me in waves, usually in the quiet moments of the morning when the coffee pot hissed and the house felt too big. He had loved this church. He had loved the stained glass that turned the Virginia sunlight into streaks of blood red and royal blue. And he had trusted Pastor Leonard Cross. Pastor Cross stood high at the pulpit, a figure of absolute authority in a tailored charcoal suit that cost more than my car. He didn't shout. He commanded. He had a voice that reverberated through the sanctuary like thunder rolling off the Blue Ridge Mountains, deep and resonant, vibrating in your chest until you felt it was God himself speaking to you. "When you plant in faith," he proclaimed, his gaze sweeping over the congregation like a physical touch, locking eyes with the widows, the lonely, and the desperate. "God doesn't just return what you give, he multiplies it, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. He paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the room. "But you cannot hold back," he whispered, leaning over the lectern. "You cannot grip your seed tightly and expect a harvest. You must open your hand. You must trust the vessel God has chosen." The congregation erupted in a chorus of amens. Then he looked right at the section where the widows sat. "Some of you are holding on to your husband's legacy," he said softly, "but the best way to honor the dead is to invest in the living." I felt the heat of his gaze. It felt like he was speaking directly to me. I felt the pressure wash over me, drowning out the quiet, nagging whisper in my gut that urged me to wait. That instinct, the one that had served me well for 69 years, was screaming that $5,000 was too much, that Richard would have wanted me to fix the leaking roof or update the plumbing. But I ignored it. I was grieving, I was lonely, and I was desperate to believe that my sacrifice meant something. I wanted to believe that by giving this money, I was somehow keeping Richard's memory alive and securing a legacy that death couldn't touch. I stood up on my aching knees as the choir began to sing, "I Surrender All." I walked down the center aisle, the carpet soft beneath my sensible heels, clutching that envelope like a lifeline. The ushers smiled at me, proud, encouraging smiles. Sister Lucy, so faithful. Sister Lucy, a pillar of the community. I reached the front. Pastor Cross was standing by the altar, his hands raised in blessing. He locked eyes with me as I approached the wicker offering basket. His expression softened into something that looked like fatherly love. "God sees you, Sister Hart," he said, his voice low enough that only I could hear it over the swelling organ music. "He sees your sacrifice, and he will remember." I dropped the envelope into the basket. It landed with a soft flutter, disappearing among the other white envelopes. "Thank you, Pastor," I whispered, tears pricking my eyes. "It's for the building fund, for the new youth center Richard wanted." "It will build mountains, Lucy," he promised, squeezing my shoulder. I walked back to my seat feeling lighter, as if I had purchased peace of mind. But peace, I would soon learn, is expensive, and I had been overcharged. 2 hours later, the service had ended. The coffee hour in the fellowship hall was winding down, and the sanctuary was empty, the heavy oak doors closed against the afternoon heat. I had stayed behind to help the altar guild strip the flowers, a task I usually found soothing. By the time I gathered my purse to leave, the church was silent, save for the low hum of the ventilation system and the distant, muffled sound of the choir practicing in the annex building. I walked toward the side exit that led to the parking lot, my car keys jingling in my hand. But as I passed the administrative wing, a strange instinct stopped me cold. It wasn't a noise. It wasn't a movement. It was just a pull, a sudden sharp curiosity that felt like a tap on the shoulder. Where did the envelope go? I told myself I was being ridiculous. The ushers took the baskets. They counted the money in the finance room with a deacon present. That was the protocol. That was the rule. But my feet didn't move toward the exit. They turned toward the hallway. The administrative wing was dimly lit, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I walked softly, my rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the linoleum. I told myself I was just checking the bulletin board, just seeing if the schedule for next week was up. Then I saw it. The heavy oak door to the pastor's office was standing just a fraction of an inch ajar. A sliver of golden light spilled out onto the gray floor, cutting through the shadows. I shouldn't have looked. I should have kept walking. I should have gone home to my empty house and my memories. But I stopped. I pressed my back against the wall, inching closer to the crack, my breath held tight in my chest. Through the sliver of space, I saw Pastor Cross sitting at his massive mahogany desk. He wasn't praying. He wasn't studying scripture. He was humming. It was a hymn I didn't recognize, a jarring, upbeat, almost jaunty tune that clashed violently with the solemnity of the day. He was bobbing his head to the rhythm, looking nothing like the somber man of God who had stood in the pulpit an hour ago. In front of him, the wicker offering basket sat on the desk, overflowing with envelopes. I watched, mesmerized by horror as he sorted through them. He moved with the speed and precision of a bank teller, his fingers flying. He would rip an envelope open, glance at the contents, and toss it into one of two piles. Cash went into a canvas bag on his left. Checks went into a neat stack on his right. Then, his hand landed on a cream-colored envelope. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was mine. Richard Hart Memorial was written in my shaky script on the front. I expected him to pause. I expected him to bow his head, to offer a moment of silence for the widow's mite, to treat that donation with the reverence he had promised me at the altar. He didn't. He tore it open with a casual, violent rip, tossing the torn paper onto the floor. He unfolded the check. He looked at the number, $5,000, and a slow, satisfied smirk curled his lips. It wasn't a smile of gratitude. It was the smile of a man who had just won a bet. Cha-ching, I heard him whisper. The sound of those two words shattered my world. Cha-ching, like a cash register, like a game show. Then he did something that made my stomach turn over. Instead of placing the check in the canvas bank deposit bag with the others, or in the locked metal box marked missions that sat on the credenza behind him, he reached down. He slid open his personal desk drawer, the bottom one hidden near his knee. He dropped my husband's legacy inside, burying it beneath a stack of what looked like car magazines and personal mail. Then he slammed the drawer shut with his knee. The betrayal hit me physically, like a punch to the gut. He wasn't depositing it. He was skimming it. He was taking the money meant for a youth center and hiding it in his personal stash. I took a step back, my mind reeling, and my vision blurring with sudden hot tears of rage. I needed to get out. I needed to think. But as I stepped back, the heel of my shoe caught the edge of the runner rug that lined the hallway. Scuff. The sound was soft, barely a whisper of leather against wool, but in the tomb-like silence of the hallway, it sounded like a gunshot. Inside the office, the humming stopped abruptly. I froze. My lungs locked. I pressed myself flat against the hallway wall, pulling my purse tight to my chest, praying that the shadows would swallow me whole. The leather chair squeaked as weight was shifted. Then the slow, heavy thud of footsteps approaching the door. "Who's there?" Pastor Cross called out. His voice was unrecognizable. It wasn't the deep, resonant baritone of the pulpit. It was sharp, high-pitched, and edged with paranoia. It was the voice of a man who had something to hide. I didn't breathe. I squeezed my eyes shut, listening to his footsteps stop just on the other side of the door. I could see his shadow shift in the crack of light on the floor. He was standing right there, inches away. If he pushed the door open, if he leaned his head out into the hallway, he would see me. "Is someone there?" he asked again, softer this time. Dangerous. The silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. I could hear the buzz of the lights. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. I imagined him reaching for the doorknob, turning it, and finding me cowering in the hallway like a spy. Then, his phone rang. The shrill ringtone shattered the tension. I heard him huff a breath of annoyance and turn back toward his desk. "Yeah?" he answered, his voice fading as he walked away from the door. "No, I told you, the transfer happens on Monday. Don't push me." I didn't wait to hear the rest. I slipped off my shoes, holding them in my hand, and ran in my stocking feet down the hallway, past the choir room, and out the side exit into the blinding Virginia heat. I burst out into the parking lot, gasping for air, the asphalt burning through my stockings. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so violently I dropped them twice before managing to unlock my car. I threw myself into the driver's seat and locked the doors, my chest heaving. I stared at the red brick building, looming over me against the gray sky. It didn't look like a church anymore. It looked like a bank vault. And the man inside wasn't a shepherd. He was a wolf who had learned to wear wool. I started the engine, intending to drive straight to the police station. But then I stopped. And say what? I thought. That a pastor put a check in a drawer? He would deny it. He would say he was keeping it safe. He would say I was confused, a grieving widow seeing things that weren't there. He was a pillar of the community, a man who dined with the mayor. I was just Lucy Hart, a retired librarian who lived alone with a cat and a memory. No. If I was going to take down a giant, I needed more than a sling. I needed a stone. But as I put the car in reverse, looking up at the office window on the second floor, I saw the blinds twitch, just a fraction, just enough for a pair of eyes to peer out. He was watching me. I shivered, despite the heat, backed out of the space and drove away, keeping my eyes on the rearview mirror and watching the church shrink into the distance. I thought I had escaped unnoticed. I was wrong. 15 minutes later, I was sitting in the parking lot of the grocery store 3 miles away, trying to stop my hands from shaking, when a black Cadillac Escalade pulled into the spot directly facing mine. It idled there, the engine rumbling low and menacing. The windows were tinted pitch black. I couldn't see the driver, but the license plate was memorable, G0DW1LL. Pastor Cross's personal vehicle. He hadn't stayed in the office. He had followed me. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. I jumped, staring at the screen. It was a text message from a number I hadn't have saved, but the context made it clear who it was. Sister Lucy, you left in such a hurry. You forgot your blessing. I looked up at the black Cadillac Escalade. The driver's side window rolled down slowly. Pastor Cross sat there, still wearing his suit, his sunglasses reflecting the gray sky. He wasn't smiling. He raised his hand, pointing a finger at me in a gesture that mimicked a blessing but felt entirely like a curse. Then he rolled the window up and drove away, leaving me sitting in the grocery store lot, realizing that my secret investigation had barely begun, and I was already the hunted. I didn't sleep that night. My house in the Fan District, usually a sanctuary of high ceilings and comforting shadows, felt like a cage with glass walls. Every time a car drove down Hanover Avenue, its headlights sweeping across my living room ceiling, I flinched, expecting to see a black Cadillac Escalade idling at the curb. I told myself I was overreacting, that Leonard Cross was just a greedy man, not a violent one. But my gut, that ancient survivalist instinct that lives in the marrow of every woman, told me otherwise. I had seen the mask slip. I had seen the wolf. And now the wolf knew I was watching. The next morning, Monday, broke with a heavy, gray fog rolling off the James River, shrouding Richmond in a damp mist that muted the sounds of the city. I tried to stick to my routine. I drank my coffee, fed the cat, and reasoned that if I acted normal, if I played the part of the confused, grieving widow, maybe he would believe that I hadn't seen anything in that drawer. Maybe he would think I was just a senile old woman who got spooked and ran. I decided to go to the pharmacy to pick up my blood pressure medication. It was a mundane errand, safe and public. I parked my old beige Toyota in the lot on Carey Street, gripping my purse tight. But when I returned to my car 15 minutes later, the air shifted. I unlocked the driver's side door and slid in, tossing my bag onto the passenger seat. The humidity had fogged up the windows, turning the world outside into a blur of gray and green. I put the key in the ignition. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was sharp, rhythmic, and terrifyingly close. It came from the driver's window, inches from my ear. I froze. Through the condensation on the glass, a dark silhouette loomed. It blocked out the gray light, casting a long shadow over my lap. I didn't want to look. I wanted to lock the doors and drive, but my hand was shaking so badly I couldn't turn the key. I rolled the window down 2 inches. Just a crack. The scent hit me first, that heavy, cloying mix of sandalwood and expensive oud cologne. It filled the small cabin of my car instantly, suffocating the smell of rain. Sister Lucy, a voice purred. It was Pastor Cross, again. He was standing right against the door, leaning down so his face was level with the crack. He wasn't smiling today. His eyes were hidden behind dark aviator sunglasses, reflecting my own terrified face back at me. "Pastor," I managed to choke out. "You startled me." "I seem to be doing that a lot lately," he said, his voice smooth, devoid of the panic I had heard in the hallway yesterday. He was back in control. "You left in such a hurry yesterday, Lucy. We didn't get a chance to pray over your gift." I wasn't feeling well," I lied, gripping the steering wheel. "The heat." "The heat," he repeated, tasting the word. "Or maybe it was the Spirit. Sometimes the Holy Spirit moves us in ways we don't understand. It unsettles the flesh." He reached into his pocket. My heart seized. For a split second, I thought he was pulling out a weapon. Instead, he produced a small black velvet box. "The Lord whispered to me this morning," he said, holding the box up to the window crack. "He told me you were struggling. He told me the enemy was trying to sow seeds of doubt in your heart and trying to separate you from the flock. He told me you needed a tether." He didn't ask permission. He reached his hand through the open crack, his fingers thick and strong. "Give me your wrist, Lucy." It wasn't a request. It was a command. I should have pulled away. I should have rolled up the window and crushed his fingers. But fear is a paralyzing agent. I sat there rigid as he reached in and grabbed my left wrist. His skin was hot and his grip tight enough to bruise. He snapped the box open with his thumb. Inside lay a silver bracelet, thin as a wire, engraved with a cross that looked more like a sword than a symbol of mercy. With practiced speed, he clasped it around my wrist. The metal was ice cold against my pulse. "There," he whispered, releasing me, but leaving his hand resting on the doorframe. "Do not take it off. This is a covenant piece. As long as you wear this, you are under my protection. If you remove it, well, we wouldn't want the enemy to find you exposed, would we?" He tapped the roof of my car twice. Thud, thud. "Go in peace, sister," he said. He walked away, disappearing into the fog like a phantom. I sat there for 10 minutes, hyperventilating and staring at the silver shackle on my wrist. It wasn't a gift. It was a tag. He had branded me. That night, the anger finally overtook the fear. He thought he could intimidate me. He thought a piece of jewelry would silence me. He had mistaken my silence for submission. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to hunt. The next morning, Tuesday, the weather turned worse. The sky was the color of a bruised plum, dumping a cold, steady rain over Richmond. It was a perfect cover. I put on my dark raincoat and a wool hat and parked my car 3 blocks away from the church on a side street lined with weeping willows. I didn't walk through the parking lot. Instead, I cut through the overgrown azalea bushes that lined the side of the administrative wing. The mud sucked at my boots, the wet leaves soaked my coat, but I crept forward, inch by inch, until I was crouched beneath the window of the pastor's office. The blinds were drawn, but not all the way. A 2-inch gap at the bottom allowed a slice of yellow light to spill out onto the wet mulch. I pressed my face near the corner of the sash, the rain dripping off my nose. Inside, the office was dim, lit only by the green banker's lamp on his desk. Pastor Cross was there. And so was May Turner. May was one of my oldest friends, a sweet, fragile woman who had lost her husband 5 years ago. She was sitting in the guest chair, her back to me, but I could tell she was weeping. Her shoulders shook violently. Her hands were covering her face. And Pastor Cross? He wasn't comforting her. He wasn't offering a tissue or a prayer. He was leaning back in his leather chair, his feet up on the desk, looking bored. He was holding a stack of cash, thick bundles of hundreds, 50s, and 20s, and he was counting it. Snap, snap, snap. He licked his thumb and peeled off the bills with a rhythmic, wet sound that made my stomach turn. "I need you to liquidate the rest, May," I heard him say. His voice was muffled by the glass, but unmistakable. "The new ministry in the Bahamas needs founders. Don't you want to be a founder? Don't you want to secure a legacy for your grandson?" I don't have any more," May sobbed, her voice high and thin with panic. "That was the savings account. The house is all I have left. Then take a loan, Cross said coldly, not looking up from the money. God rewards the bold, May. If you hold back now, you're telling the Lord you don't trust him. Is that what you want to tell him? No, she wept. No, Pastor. Good. I'll have the papers drawn up by Friday. We need the funds before the wire transfer deadline. My blood boiled. He wasn't just skimming donations. He was draining them dry. He was bullying a widow out of her home to fund a ministry in the Bahamas. I raised my phone with trembling hands. I lined up the lens through the gap in the leaves and snapped a single, silent photo of him holding the cash. I shifted my weight, trying to get a better shot of him counting the cash. My boot slid on a slick patch of wet mulch. Crunch, the sound of a dry branch snapping under my weight cracked through the air like a pistol shot. Inside the office, Pastor Cross went still. He didn't look around wildly. He didn't ask, "What was that?" He moved with the terrifying precision of a predator who hears a twig snap in the forest. He dropped the money. He slowly took his feet off the desk. He stood up, his eyes fixing directly on the window. I dropped to the ground. I pressed myself flat into the mud, burying my face in the wet leaves, praying that the azaleas were thick enough to hide me. My heart was hammering so loud I was sure it was vibrating through the brick wall. I heard the window latch click. Then the terrifying sound of the heavy sash sliding up. "Who's there?" His voice drifted out, directly above my head. I squeezed my eyes shut. I could feel his presence looming over me. I held my breath until my lungs burned, terrified that the steam from my breath in the cold air would give me away. "I know someone is out there," he snarled. I opened one eye, staring through the gaps in the bush. I could see the polished tips of his black Oxfords. He was leaning out. If he looked down, straight down, he would see the black shape of my coat against the brown mud. He stood there for an eternity. Raindrops fell from the window ledge onto my neck, cold and sharp. Then a phone rang inside the office. "Forget it," he muttered. He slammed the window shut. I heard the lock click. I didn't move for 10 minutes. I lay in the mud, shivering and listening to the rain, realizing how close I had come to being caught. He wasn't just a thief. The look in his eyes when he scanned the bushes wasn't fear. It was violence. I crawled backward through the mud until I reached the tree line. Then I scrambled to my feet and ran to my car. I drove home in a daze, the fog rolling off the James River so thick I could barely see the hood of my old beige Toyota. I needed to tell someone. I needed to call Nora. But first, I needed to get the deed to my house. If he was coming for May's home, he would come for mine next. I needed to secure my papers. I turned onto Hanover Avenue. The street lamps were haloed in mist, casting long, skeletal shadows across the porches. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed it immediately, the porch light. I always left the porch light on when I left the house. It was a habit Richard had instilled in me, a beacon to welcome me home. It was dark. The bulb wasn't just off. The fixture looked twisted, as if someone had unscrewed it. I sat in the car, the engine idling. My chest tightened. I looked at the front door. It wasn't just unlocked. It was standing ajar, swinging gently in the damp wind and revealing a slice of darkness inside. "Don't go in," a voice screamed in my head. "Call the police." But my phone was dead. And inside that house, in the lockbox under my bed, was the deed to my property and $10,000 in emergency cash. If he took that, I was destitute. Adrenaline is a strange drug. It makes you do stupid things. I grabbed the heavy flashlight I kept in the glove compartment and kicked off my muddy boots on the porch so I wouldn't make a sound. I stepped into the foyer. The house was silent, but it wasn't empty. I could feel it. The air pressure was different. There was a scent in the air, faint but unmistakable, sandalwood and rain. He was here. Creak. The sound came from upstairs, a heavy footstep on the vintage floorboards of my bedroom. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stifle a gasp. He was in my bedroom. I moved silently into the shadows of the coat closet under the stairs, pulling the door almost shut, leaving a tiny crack to see through. I crouched among the winter coats, smelling of old wool and mothballs, shivering uncontrollably. I waited for the sounds of destruction. I expected to hear him tearing the room apart looking for evidence, but there was nothing. Just the slow, rhythmic pacing of someone walking around my bed. Step, step, pause. It was terrifying. He wasn't robbing me. He was hunting me. Then the footsteps stopped. He walked out of the bedroom and onto the landing. I could see through the crack in the closet door. A shadow moved across the banister. A man, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark raincoat and a hat pulled low. He paused at the top of the stairs. I peered through the crack in the closet door, my breath caught in my throat. I expected to see the pastor. I expected to see his expensive Italian suit and his polished Oxfords. But the shadow on the landing wasn't him. It was a stranger, a man I had never seen before. He was huge, broad-shouldered and thick-necked, wearing dark work clothes and heavy tactical boots. He wore leather gloves, tight and black. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was a job. Pastor Cross hadn't come himself. He was too smart for that. He must have sent this wolf to do his dirty work. A fixer. Someone who didn't exist on the church payroll. The stranger stood there, silent as a grave, looking down into the dark foyer. He didn't look nervous. He looked bored. He took a step down. The wood groaned under his heavy boot. He stopped halfway down the stairs and turned his head slowly, scanning the hallway, his eyes lingering on the closet door where I was hiding. I gripped the flashlight, my knuckles white. I knew with terrifying certainty that if this man opened the door, a flashlight wouldn't save me. But he didn't come down. He had done what he came to do. He turned around with military precision and walked briskly down the back servant stairs that led to the kitchen. I heard the back door open, then the soft click of the lock engaging. He had locked the door behind him. That detail chilled me more than anything else. A burglar leaves a door open to run. A professional locks it to trap you in with the fear. The silence that followed was louder than the noise. I waited in the closet for 20 agonizing minutes until my legs were numb. Then, clutching the flashlight like a weapon, I crept upstairs. I braced myself to see my room destroyed. I pushed the door open. My bedroom was perfect. The drawers were closed. The jewelry box was untouched. The photos were straight. It was immaculate. Except for the bed. On my pillow, in the exact center where my head would lay, was a single sheet of paper. He hadn't used a rock. He hadn't used tape. He had taken a long, serrated carving knife from my kitchen downstairs, driven it through the paper and deep into the mattress, pinning the note to my pillow like a butterfly in a display case. The note was written in elegant, calligraphy-style script. Touch not my anointed, and do my prophets no harm. Psalm 105, verse 15. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the knife, the handle still vibrating slightly. My hands trembled so violently I could barely breathe. This wasn't a robbery. It was a sermon, and I knew exactly who was preaching. I didn't sleep in my bed that night. I couldn't, not with the image of that knife piercing my pillow burned into my retinas. I took a photo of the threat with my shaking hands. Evidence? I told myself. And then I packed a bag, grabbed my medication, a change of clothes, and the lockbox that the intruder had failed to find. I drove to a motel on the outskirts of Richmond, one of those places where the neon sign buzzes, and nobody asks why an elderly woman is checking in at 3 a.m. with fear in her eyes. I pushed the dresser in front of the door and sat in the dark, watching the shadows stretch across the peeling wallpaper. Fear is a heavy blanket, but by the time the sun rose, it had burned off, revealing something harder underneath, cold, crystalline rage. He had violated my sanctuary, threatened my life, and probably thought I was just a frightened widow who would retreat into the shadows. He was wrong. He had just handed me the motivation I needed to bury him. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed someone who understood the language of thieves, numbers. I called Nora, my daughter. Back when I first mentioned donating Richard's memorial fund to the church, she had begged me to wait. She had sent me articles about the pastor's spending that I refused to read, accusing her of being cynical. Now, listening to me shake on the phone, my daughter didn't say, "I told you so." When I told her about the break-in, her voice went deadly calm. She gave me a name, Helena Ricks. "She's a retired IRS forensic auditor, Mom," Nora said. "She used to take down cartels. If Cross buried the money, she'll find the shovel." 2 hours later, I was driving to the Westover Hills neighborhood. Helena lived in a craftsman bungalow that smelled of stale coffee and printer toner. She was a sharp, angled woman in her late 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that looked like flint. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I put the photo of the knife on her kitchen table. Then I put the photo I had taken of the pastor counting cash. "He's stealing from the building fund," I said, "and he's going to hurt anyone who gets in his way." Helena looked at the photos, then at me. She didn't look shocked. She looked hungry. "Get the boxes from the car," she said. For the next 2 days, Helena's dining room became a war room. We didn't have a warrant, so we had to use what was public. We pulled the church's 990 tax forms for the last 5 years, the property records, and the vendor lists that the church published in their annual transparency newsletters, a chaotic mess of receipts and self-congratulatory photos. It wasn't like the movies. I didn't type a name into a computer and get a red flashing fraud alert. It was a slog. It was an agonizing, eye-straining work. For 10 hours straight, the only sound in the room was the ticking of a grandfather clock and the rustle of paper. We were looking for a needle in a haystack, but we didn't even know what the needle looked like. "He's smart," Helena muttered on the second day, rubbing her temples. She circled a line item in red ink, her frustration palpable. "Look at this. He lists everything under missionary outreach. It's a black hole category. You can dump millions in there and claim it's for digging wells in Sudan or building orphanages in Haiti. Unless you go there and count the bricks, you can't prove the money didn't go there." I leaned back, my eyes burning. "So he gets away with it? Because he labeled it God's work?" "Unless we find a leak," Helena said, "a recurring payment that doesn't fit the pattern." I pulled a stack of old newsletters toward me and started comparing the missionary updates with the expense reports. January, $12,000 for Kenya orphanage roof repair, photos included. March, $8,000 for soup kitchen supplies, receipts attached. Then my finger stopped on an entry from 3 years ago. August, $8,500. Vendor, Samaritan Consulting Group. Purpose, strategic planning. I frowned. I flipped to the next month. September, $8,500. Vendor, Samaritan Consulting Group. Purpose, leadership development. I flipped through every newsletter for the last 3 years. The entry was there every single month, like clockwork. Always $8,500, just under the $10,000 threshold that triggers an automatic banking alert. "Helena," I said, my voice quiet. "Who are the Samaritan Consulting Group?" Helena looked up. "Consultants. Churches use them all the time for fundraising campaigns." "For 3 years?" I asked. "Every single month, and look at the date of the first payment." I slid the paper across the table. The first payment to Samaritan Consulting was made on August 14th. "That's 3 days after the widow Jenkins died," I whispered. "She left her entire estate to the church, $200,000. Helena grabbed her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keys as she accessed the Virginia State Corporation Commission database. "Samaritan Consulting Group," she read aloud. "Incorporated? August 12th, 2 days before the first check was cut." "Who is the registered agent?" I asked, leaning over her shoulder. "It's a P.O. box in Delaware," Helena said, her eyes narrowing. "That's standard for hiding ownership. But look at the mailing address for billing." She highlighted a line on the screen. 1402 Ocean Drive, Suite B, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Google it, I said. Helena pulled up EarthView. She zoomed in on the address. It wasn't an office building. It wasn't a consulting firm. It wasn't a church. It was a marina. Suite B isn't an office, Helena whispered, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in her glasses. It's a boat slip. The realization hit us both at the same time. The silence in the room shattered. He's not hiring consultants, I said, my voice trembling with rage. He's making payments on a yacht. Helena kept digging. Once we had the thread, the sweater began to unravel. Samaritan Consulting was the leak. Over 3 years, nearly $400,000 had been funneled into that account, and that was just one shell company. We have him, Helena said. She pointed to a column on the spreadsheet. And we have the victims. Look at this list. 53 recurring donors. May Turner, Iris Miller, Sister Opal. He targeted the widow specifically. Is this list enough for the FBI? I asked. It's enough to open an investigation, Helena said. But to get an arrest warrant now, before he destroys the evidence? We need a witness. We need someone on the inside to confirm he controls that account. My phone buzzed on the table. I jumped, my nerves still frayed from the break-in. I looked at the screen. It was a text message from May Turner. Lucy, I need to see you. Tonight. I typed back quickly. Where? Are you safe? The response took a minute. The bubbles appeared and disappeared. Hollywood Cemetery, midnight. Come to the Iron Gate near the President's Circle. Come alone. Please. I think he knows. A cemetery. At midnight. It sounded like a trap. It sounded like the kind of place you went to disappear. Don't go, Helena warned, reading the text over my shoulder. He knows you're watching. He could be using her phone. If I don't go and he hurts her, I let the sentence trail off. May was weak, yes. She was easily manipulated. But she was my friend. And if she was ready to talk, then she was the witness we needed to nail the coffin shut. I'm going, I said, grabbing my coat. Take the taser, Helena said, opening her drawer and sliding a heavy black device across the table. And keep your phone on tracking. Richmond at midnight is a ghost town, especially near the river. I drove my car to Oregon Hill, parking 2 blocks away from the entrance to Hollywood Cemetery. The fog had returned, thicker than before, rolling off the James River in waves that obscured the streetlights. I walked up the hill toward the massive iron gates. Hollywood Cemetery is a city of the dead, a sprawling, hilly landscape of winding paths, towering obelisks and ancient crypts where presidents and Confederate soldiers lay buried under moss-covered stone. The gates were locked, but the pedestrian entrance was open. I slipped inside. The silence was absolute. The fog swirled around the tombstones like grasping hands. Every shadow looked like a man in a black coat, and every rustle of wet leaves sounded like a footstep behind me. I gripped the taser in my pocket, my thumb on the safety. May? I whispered. The sound died in the mist. I walked toward the President's Circle, the highest point in the cemetery. The outline of President Monroe's Gothic birdcage tomb loomed in the darkness, looking like a prison cell made of iron. A figure was sitting on a stone bench overlooking the river rapids below. Small, hunched, and shivering. I approached slowly. May? The figure jumped, letting out a strangled gasp. It was May. She was clutching her purse to her chest, her eyes wide and rimmed with red. She looked like she had aged 10 years in 2 days. You came, she breathed, looking wildly into the dark tree line. You shouldn't have come. He has eyes everywhere, Lucy. The deacons, they patrol the streets. They take photos. Let them look, I said, sitting beside her on the cold stone, keeping my eyes scanning the perimeter. Helena found the shell companies, May. We found Samaritan Consulting. We know about the marina in Florida. We know he's buying a yacht with the building fund. May made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. A yacht? Is that what it is? She shook her head. I thought it was a retreat center. He's stealing it all, I said, grabbing her hand. Her skin was ice cold. But we have the paper trail now. We can go to the police. You just need to tell them what he said to you in the office about the loan. Mai gripped my wrist, her fingernails digging into my skin. It doesn't matter what you know. It's too late, Lucy. He's leaving. The words hung in the damp air. What do you mean? I asked. He came to my house tonight, Mai whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. He stood in my kitchen, drinking my tea, and he told me that God called him to a new mission. He said the church in Richmond has lost its way. He said he needs to plant a new seed in the Bahamas. He's fleeing, I realized, my stomach dropping. He knows we're getting close. He's liquidating the accounts on Sunday, Mai sobbed. He told the board it's for a capital investment in the new ministry. He's emptying the building fund, the mission fund, and the pension fund. All of it. Sunday? I checked my watch. It was early Wednesday morning. That's in 4 days. He has a flight booked for Sunday night, Mai said. He showed me the ticket and wanted me to come with him. He said I could be his administrative assistant in paradise if I signed over the deed to my house. I felt a surge of nausea. He was trying to harvest one last crop before he burned the field. Did you sign it? I asked. No, Mai whispered. I told him I needed time. But Lucy, he looked at me. He looked at me like I was something he needed to scrape off his shoe. He said, time is a luxury you don't have, sister. She looked at me, her eyes pleading. He's going to run, and he's taking my grandson's college money. He's taking everything, Mai sobbed. He's not running because he's scared, Lucy, she continued. He's running because he's finished. He told me the Richmond mission is complete. He's probably drained the accounts dry to build his paradise. We were running out of time. The audit would take weeks to process through the FBI. By the time they froze the assets, he would be in a non-extradition country, sipping Mai Tais on a boat named the Samaritan. We needed something faster. We needed a confession. We needed him to admit, on tape, that the money was his personal piggy bank. He won't leave on Sunday, I said, my voice hardening, because we're going to stop him. How? Mai asked. He's powerful, Lucy. The police love him. The mayor loves him. He loves himself more, I said, and that's how we catch him. I stood up, the fog swirling around my legs. I need you to go home, lock your doors, and don't answer the phone. Can you do that? Mai nodded, wiping her eyes. What are you going to do? I looked at the tomb of the president behind us, a monument to power and legacy. I'm going to go back to the church, I said. I'm going to apologize, and I'm going to wear a wire. Mai gasped. He'll kill you. He can try, I said, touching the pocket where the taser lay heavy and cold. But he's forgetting one thing. He thinks we're sheep. He thinks we're just dumb, old women who will baa and follow him off the cliff. I looked at Mai, seeing the steel that was buried under her fear. He's about to find out, I said, that even sheep have teeth. Wednesday morning broke over Richmond with a sky like slate, the rain freezing on the windshields and turning the cobblestones of the fan district into slick black mirrors. In the safety of the motel bathroom, the fluorescent lights hummed a nervous tune as Helena taped the wire to my chest. The adhesive was cold, biting into the thin skin right between my ribs. I winced as she smoothed the tape down, securing the tiny black microphone so it sat flat against my sternum. I stared at myself in the mirror. I saw a 69-year-old grandmother. I saw the lines around my eyes, the soft curve of my jaw, the floral blouse, and the sensible beige cardigan. I looked harmless. I looked like a woman whose biggest concern should be the rising price of yarn or the arthritis in her knees. But under the silk and wool, I was wired for sound. It looks invisible, Helena promised, stepping back to inspect her handiwork. She adjusted my collar, her face grim. But remember, Lucy, this isn't a movie. The range on the transmitter is limited to the parking lot where I'll be recording. And the microphone, it's sensitive. She locked eyes with me. If he touches you, if he pats you on the back or puts his hand on your shoulder to pray or hugs you, he will feel it. A chill that had nothing to do with the freezing rain ran down my spine. Pastor Cross was a toucher. He used physical contact as a weapon, a heavy hand on the shoulder to dominate, a two-handed handshake to trap, and a hug to smother. To get the confession, I would have to get close enough for him to whisper, but keep him far enough away that he couldn't discover the hard plastic lump taped to my chest. "I can do this," I said, though my voice sounded thinner than I wanted. "If it goes wrong," Helena said, pressing a burner phone into my hand, "don't argue. Don't fight. Just run. I'll have the engine running in the lot." I drove to the church alone. Helena followed in her car, parking 3 rows back, hidden between a church van and a dumpster. I walked up the concrete steps of the administrative wing. My legs felt heavy, like I was walking through water. I clutched my purse against my side to hide the slight bulge of the battery pack taped to my waist. The hallway was empty. The air smelled of floor wax and that lingering, cloying scent of sandalwood. I reached the heavy oak door. "Touch not my anointed." The words from the note on my pillow echoed in my head. I pushed them away. I wasn't touching the anointed. I was exposing the charlatan. I knocked. "Come in," his voice boomed. I pushed the door open. Pastor Cross was standing behind his desk, looking out the window at the gray sky. He turned slowly. When he saw me, his eyebrows lifted, but his expression didn't soften. He looked guarded, suspicious. "Sister Lucy," he said, not moving toward me. "I wondered if you would come back." I stepped inside and let the door click shut behind me. The sound was final. I was in the cage. I played the part I had rehearsed in the mirror. I slumped my shoulders, let my hands tremble visibly, and lowered my eyes to the floor, radiating shame and confusion. "I came to apologize, Pastor," I whispered. He didn't speak. He just watched me, assessing the threat level. I haven't been sleeping," I continued, letting a wobble enter my voice. "My daughter, Nora, she's been saying such terrible things. She showed me these articles. She said you were hurting people." I looked up at him, making my eyes wide and pleading. But then I prayed on it, and I realized Nora doesn't understand faith. She looks at numbers, but she doesn't see the spirit. The tension in his shoulders dropped an inch. His ego was a starving animal, and I had just offered it a steak. "The world rarely understands the burden of leadership, Lucy," he said, his voice smoothing out into that practiced, silky baritone. "They see the harvest, but they don't see the labor." "I know," I said. I walked to the chair opposite his desk and sat down, placing my purse on the floor. I reached into my bag and pulled out my checkbook. His eyes flicked to the blue vinyl cover instantly. "I want to make things right," I said. "With you, with God. I want to sign the pledge for the new ministry. I want to be a founder." He smiled then. It was a slow, creeping thing. He walked around the desk and leaned against the front of it, crossing his arms. He was 5 feet away. "Safe. That is very wise, Lucy," he said. "The Lord honors those who repent." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the pledge form for $10,000. He slid it across the mahogany surface toward me. "Sign it," he said softly, "and we will wash away this unpleasantness." I picked up the pen. My hand shook, and this time I didn't have to fake it. I held the pen over the paper, but I didn't write. "Pastor," I said, looking at the checkbook, "before I sign, I need you to help me with something, just so I can tell Nora she's wrong." "What is it?" he asked, a flicker of impatience crossing his face. "Nora says the board of trustees controls the money. She says if I give this to the building fund, it might get tied up in committees and votes. She says you don't really have the power to use it for the Bahamas mission." I leaned forward, forcing him to lean in too, closer to the microphone taped between my ribs. "I need to know that you are the one in charge, Pastor," I whispered conspiratorially. "I don't trust the board. I trust you. Tell me you control the accounts. Tell me you can move this money where it needs to go without them stopping you." He stared at me. I held my breath. I was appealing to his narcissism, betting everything that his need to be the absolute ruler was stronger than his caution. He took the bait. He pushed off the desk and leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could smell the coffee on his breath beneath the cologne. "The board is a formality, Lucy," he said, his voice low and arrogant. "They are sheep. I am the shepherd. I built this church. I incorporated the LLCs. The money flows where I command it because I am the vessel." The tape was rolling. Helena was hearing this. "But the accounts?" I pressed, widening my eyes. "The ones Nora found? The consulting group?" "I own them," he sneered, dropping the pretense of humility entirely. "Samaritan Consulting is mine. The resort in Nassau is mine. If I need it to recharge my spirit for the work of the Lord, then that is God's work. I answer to no one but the Almighty. Certainly not to a board of deacons who can barely read a balance sheet." Got him. He had just admitted to commingling funds, owning the shell companies, and bypassing the board. It was a full confession. I let out a breath I had been holding for 5 minutes. "Thank you, Pastor," I said, my voice dropping the tremble. That's all I needed to hear. I put the pen down. I closed my checkbook and slipped it back into my purse. The change in the room was instantaneous. The air pressure dropped. Pastor Cross straightened up. His eyes narrowed, scanning my face. He saw the shift in my posture, saw the sudden clarity in my eyes, and realized too late that the confused old widow had just evaporated. "You're not signing the check," he said. It wasn't a question. "No," I said, standing up. "I'm not." I grabbed my purse and turned toward the door. "Sit down, Lucy," he commanded. His voice boomed, rattling the frames on the wall. "I'm leaving," I said, reaching for the doorknob. "I said sit down." He moved with terrifying speed for a big man. He lunged across the room and slammed his hand against the doorframe, inches from my head, boxing me in. His body blocked the exit. "You came here to spy," he snarled, his face twisting into a mask of rage. "Who sent you? Was it your daughter? Was it the reporter?" "Get out of my way," I said, clutching my purse against my side, trying to protect the transmitter battery. "You don't leave until you confess," he shouted. He reached out and grabbed my shoulders, his fingers digging into the wool of my cardigan. "We are going to pray the demon of deceit out of you right now." "Don't touch me," I yelled. He pulled me toward him, shaking me. And then it happened. His right hand slipped from my shoulder and brushed against the front of my blouse. His palm grazed the hard plastic lump taped to my sternum. He froze. He looked down at my chest, then back up at my eyes. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "You're wearing a wire," he whispered. His shock turned instantly to violence. His eyes went wide and wild. "You treacherous little witch," he roared and reached for my throat. I didn't think. I didn't pray. I just reacted with the primal instinct of a creature fighting for its life. I brought my heavy leather purse up and smashed it into his face, the metal buckle catching him on the cheek. At the same time, I lifted my right leg and drove the heel of my boot down onto the arch of his foot with every ounce of strength I possessed. He howled in pain and stumbled back, clutching his face. I threw my shoulder against the heavy oak door. It flew open. I burst into the hallway, my heart hammering like a machine gun in my chest. "Stop her!" he screamed from inside the office. "Stop that woman!" I ran. I ran faster than I had in 20 years, my boots skidding on the polished linoleum. I burst through the side exit and into the humid, gray morning. Helena's car was idling in the back row, but I knew I couldn't get to her without leading him right to the recording equipment. I had to draw him away. I scrambled into my Toyota, fumbling with the keys. I locked the doors just as the side door of the church banged open. Pastor Cross stood there, his face red, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek where the buckle had hit him. He pointed at me, shouting something I couldn't hear through the glass. I threw the car into reverse and peeled out of the parking lot, tires screeching on the wet asphalt. I didn't look back. I drove blindly, taking the first right turn, then a left, weaving through the fan district, desperate to put distance between the wolf and me. I drove for 10 minutes, my hands shaking so hard I could barely steer. I checked the rearview mirror constantly. Nothing. Just empty streets and gray fog. I let out a sob of relief. I had done it. I had the confession. I was safe. I turned onto Monument Avenue, heading toward Helena's house to drop off the wire. The historic street was lined with statues and cobblestones and slick with rain. Then, headlights flared in my rearview mirror. They were high beams, blindingly bright LED lights that cut through the fog like lasers. I squinted, adjusting my mirror. The car was coming up fast. Too fast. I tapped my brakes, signaling for them to pass. They didn't pass. They sped up. The vehicle surged forward, looming large in my rear window. It was the black Escalade. The license plate was obscured by the glare, but I didn't need to read it. I knew that massive chrome grille. It was him. Panic clawed at my throat. He hadn't stayed at the church. He had come for me. And on these empty, rain-slick streets, there were no witnesses. My speedometer climbed past 40, then 50. The Cadillac matched my speed effortlessly, its massive engine roaring closer. He bumped me. It wasn't a tap. It was a hard, metallic thud against my rear bumper that jolted my teeth and sent my aging Toyota Camry skidding sideways on the wet cobblestones. I screamed, wrestling the steering wheel and correcting the skid just before I hit a parked car. He was trying to run me off the road. "Think, Lucy, think," I shouted at myself. He had power. He had weight. But I had a smaller car, and I had maneuverability. We were coming up on a roundabout surrounding a statue of Robert E. Lee. The road split. I stayed in the center lane, letting him pull up right on my bumper, thinking I was going straight. At the last possible second, I yanked the wheel hard to the right, aiming for a narrow one-way alley that cut between two historic row houses. My tires squealed, fighting for traction. The back of my car fishtailed, clipping a trash can, sending it flying. I shot into the alley, scraping my side mirror against the brick wall. The Cadillac tried to follow, but he was too big and he was going too fast. I heard the screech of brakes, then a sickening crunch of metal on stone. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The black Cadillac Escalade had jumped the curb and slammed into the corner of a brick wall, steam hissing from the radiator. I didn't stop. I didn't check if he was hurt. I drove with white-knuckled grip, tears streaming down my face, navigating the maze of back alleys until I reached Helena's house. I practically fell out of the car, running up her porch steps. She threw the door open before I could knock, pulling me inside and locking the deadbolt, then the chain, and then the slide lock. "I got it," I gasped, ripping the tape off my chest and handing her the wire. "I got him." Helena looked out the window at my battered car, then at me. Her face was pale. "We need to upload this now," she said, "because he's not going to stop coming." We didn't sleep. Sleep was a luxury for the innocent, and that night, Helena and I were executioners. Inside Helena's craftsman bungalow, with the deadbolts thrown and the curtains drawn tight against the Richmond night, we turned the dining room into a command center. The adrenaline that had fueled my escape from the car chase had curdled into a cold, sharp focus. Helena sat at her desktop, her glasses reflecting the blue light of audio waveforms. We had the recording, the undeniable, crystal-clear confession of Leonard Cross, admitting to fraud, embezzlement, and owning the shell companies. But raw audio wasn't enough. We needed to package it, and we needed to make it impossible to ignore. "We have to redact the names of the other victims," Helena said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "If we feature May or Iris without their permission, the story becomes about them and not him. We need the focus to be entirely on the predator." For 6 hours, we worked in silence. I transcribed the audio, typing out the captions that would run across the screen. Seeing his words in print made them look even more damning. I answered to no one but the Almighty. The board is a formality. If I need it for a resort in Nassau, that is God's work. At 3 a.m., Reuben Miles, the investigative journalist from the Savannah Morning News, logged into our shared server. He had been waiting for the signal. When he heard the audio file, he sent back a single message. "This is the smoking gun. I'm waking up my editor. We run this at 6 a.m. The hours between 3 a.m. and dawn were the longest of my life. I sat by the window, peering through the blinds and watching the empty street. Every passing car made my heart seize. I expected the black Cadillac Escalade to come back. I expected the sound of breaking glass. And I gripped the taser in my pocket, ready to fight for the evidence we had gathered. But the street remained empty. He didn't come back. He probably thought he had scared me into silence. He probably thought the accident in the alley had sent me running to a hospital or hiding under my bed. He had no idea that while he was sleeping in his mansion, paid for by the widows of his congregation, we were digging his grave. At 5:58 a.m., the sky outside was turning a pale, sickly gray. Helena's finger hovered over the enter key. "Are you ready, Lucy?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but I saw the tremor in her hand. "Once we do this, there is no going back. He will lose everything, but the church, the community, it's going to shatter." I thought of May Turner, weeping in the cemetery. I thought of the knife stabbed into my pillow. I thought of the 53 names on our list of victims, women who had lost their savings, their homes, and their faith because one man decided he was God. "Let it shatter," I said. "Push it." Helena pressed the key. At 6 a.m., the story hit the internet. Prophet or predator? Local pastor caught on tape admitting to multi-million-dollar fraud. It didn't trickle out. It exploded. I watched the analytics on the screen. In the first minute, there were 10 views. In the fifth minute, 500. By 6:15 a.m., the view count was spinning so fast it looked like a slot machine. My phone began to vibrate on the table. It wasn't threats. It was notifications. Facebook shares were pouring in. Twitter was lighting up. The audio clip, the specific 30-second segment where he mocked the Board of Deacons, was ripped and posted to TikTok. It was spreading faster than a virus. At 6:30 a.m., the local Richmond news station broke into their weather report. Breaking news out of the Fan District. Shocking allegations against prominent Pastor Leonard Cross of Grace Light Church. They played the tape. Hearing his voice broadcast over the television, stripped of the pulpit's authority, sounding arrogant and cruel, was surreal. Then the phone calls started. My phone rang, then Helena's, then the landline. I picked up expecting a reporter. "Lucy?" It was Sister Opal. Her voice was shaking. "Is it true? I just saw the news. Tell me it's not true." "It's true, Opal," I said gently. "It's his voice. You know it is." "He told me," Opal sobbed. "He told me the money was for a pediatric ward in Kenya. I gave him my pension check last week." "I know," I said. "We're going to get it back." I hung up, only for the phone to ring again. It was a deacon, then the choir director. The floodgates had opened. The spell was broken. For years, he had isolated us, making each victim feel like they were the only one, the only special project. But now, in the light of day, the pattern was visible. We weren't special. We were just targets. At 7 a.m., the atmosphere in the room shifted from vindication to urgency. Helena was monitoring the police scanner on her computer. Suddenly, she stiffened. "Lucy," she said sharply, "listen." The static-filled voice of a dispatcher filled the room. "All units be advised. Suspect vehicle, black Cadillac Escalade, Virginia plates G0DW1LL, spotted heading east on I-64 toward Richmond International Airport. Excessive speed. Vehicle shows front-end damage. He's running," Helena shouted, jumping up and grabbing her keys. "He saw the news. He knows the FBI will be at his door within the hour. He's trying to get to the non-extradition countries." "The Bahamas," I realized. "He has a private charter scheduled for Sunday, but he's moving it up." "He's trying to flee with the money," Helena said. "If he gets on a plane, we never see a dime of restitution." We ran to Helena's car. I left my battered beige Toyota in her driveway. We drove toward the airport, not to stop him. We weren't police. But because we had to see it, we had to bear witness. We turned on the local news radio as we sped down the highway. The chase was live. Suspect is weaving through traffic, speeds exceeding 90 miles per hour. State troopers are deploying spike strips at the airport off-ramp. My heart pounded in my throat. I stared out the window at the gray Virginia morning, praying that the fog wouldn't cover his escape. "He won't make it," I whispered. "He can't make it." We reached the airport perimeter road just as the traffic came to a standstill. Blue lights flashed everywhere. Police cruisers, unmarked federal vehicles, news vans, it was a sea of chaos. We parked on the shoulder and ran to the chain-link fence overlooking the tarmac access road. We weren't the only ones. Dozens of people had pulled over. Below us, on the access ramp, the massive Cadillac Escalade had spun out. The front tires were shredded from the spike strips. The black beast, the symbol of his power, was sitting dead in the middle of the road, smoke pouring from the hood where he had rammed my car the night before. The doors were locked. He wasn't coming out. A SWAT team moved in, shields raised. An officer with a megaphone stepped forward. "Leonard Cross, exit the vehicle with your hands in the air." As the silence stretched for an agonizing minute, I gripped the chain-link fence, my knuckles white. Was he armed? Would he try to fight? Or was he in there shredding documents? Then the driver's side door cracked open. Leonard Cross stepped out. He wasn't wearing the tailored Italian suit he wore to preach. He wasn't wearing the pristine robes of the pulpit. He was wearing a gray tracksuit and a t-shirt. He looked disheveled, small, and pathetic. He was clutching a brown leather briefcase to his chest like a shield. "Get on the ground," the officers screamed. He hesitated. He looked around, looking at the sky and at the private jet terminals in the distance. So close, yet infinitely far away. He shouted something, probably a command, probably demanding to speak to the mayor or the governor, but his voice was swallowed by the wind. For the first time in his life, nobody was listening. 3 officers rushed him. They didn't treat him like a prophet. They treated him like a fugitive. They spun him around, slamming him against the hood of the car he had bought with stolen money. The briefcase flew from his hand, bursting open on the asphalt. Cash, stacks of $100 bills spilled out, fluttering in the wind like confetti. I watched as they pulled his arms behind his back. The metal handcuffs glinted in the morning light. Click. The sound carried up the hill. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 6 months. The silver shackles were finally on the right wrists. They dragged him toward the squad car. He looked up toward the fence and toward the highway where the crowds were watching. I don't know if he saw me or if he could pick out my face in the crowd, but I stood tall. I didn't look away. "It's over," Helena whispered beside me. "No," I said, watching them shove him into the back of the cruiser. "The arrest is over. The justice is just beginning." By Sunday morning, Grace Light Church was no longer a place of worship. It was now a crime scene. The police tape wrapped around the white pillars like a yellow chokehold. FBI agents and windbreakers were carrying out boxes of files. The same files I had risked my life to verify. They were confiscating computers, hard drives, and safe deposit boxes. But the most powerful image wasn't the police. It was the women. I stood on the lawn, watching the scene. Slowly, other cars began to pull up. May Turner got out of her daughter's car, leaning on her cane. Sister Opal arrived in a taxi. Iris, a woman from the choir who I knew had lost her savings, walked up from the bus stop. Word had spread. We hadn't planned it, but we were drawn there. We stood in a silent semicircle on the lawn, watching the empire crumble. May walked up to me. She looked frail, but her eyes were clear for the first time in months. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the silver bracelet. The covenant he had forced her to buy, the tether he used to bind her to his lies. She held it up, the silver catching the sun. I thought this meant I belonged to God, she whispered. You do, I said, but you don't belong to him. May walked to the stone steps of the church, right beneath the sign that still read Pastor Leonard Cross. She threw the bracelet down, and it hit the stone with a metallic clink. Sister Opal stepped forward. She unclasped her bracelet and threw it onto the pile, then Iris, then a woman I didn't know, then another. One by one, the widows and the faithful of Gaslight Church unchained themselves. A pile of silver chains grew on the steps, glinting in the sun, a monument to rejected lies. I was the last one. I looked down at my wrist. The skin was pale where the metal had sat. I unclasped the catch. I felt the weight lift instantly. I tossed it onto the pile. Nora appeared at my side, slipping her arm through mine. She had driven down from D.C. the moment she heard the news. You did it, Mom, she whispered, squeezing me tight. You stopped him. I looked at the army of gray-haired women standing tall on the lawn, their heads held high, watching the FBI padlock the doors to the sanctuary. No, I said, my voice steady. We stopped him. The shepherd was in a cage, and the flock was finally free. The arrest was the explosion, but the legal battle was the fallout, and radiation burned slowly. For the next 4 months, Helena and I lived inside a mountain of paperwork. The arrest at the airport had stopped Leonard Cross from fleeing, but it hadn't stripped him of his arrogance. From his holding cell, he hired a team of high-priced defense attorneys who specialized in white-collar crime, sharks in Italian suits who were paid with the last dregs of the money he had stolen from us. They filed motions to suppress the wire recording and claimed the traffic stop was illegal. They tried to paint me as a disgruntled, senile congregant with a vendetta, and Helena as a biased auditor with a grudge against the church. But they underestimated the sheer volume of the evidence. Every Tuesday, I met with the assistant U.S. attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Lauren Pritchard, in the federal courthouse on East Broad Street. We built the case brick by brick, matching every check I had found in the newsletter to a corresponding deposit in the Samaritan Consulting account. The forensic audit revealed the rot went deeper than we imagined. It wasn't just $1.2 million. It was closer to $3 million. He had liquidated the pension fund, taken out mortgages on the church property, and drained the benevolent fund meant for funeral expenses for the poor. 2 weeks before the trial, I had an unexpected visitor. I opened the front door of my house in the Fan District to find a man standing on my porch. He held a leather briefcase and wore a smile that looked like it had been sharpened. Mrs. Hart, he said, I'm Marcus Bellamy, Mr. Cross's lead counsel. My stomach dropped. I knew who he was. He was known in Richmond as the cleanup man. I have nothing to say to you, I said, gripping the doorframe. I'm not here to litigate, he said smoothly, raising a hand. I'm here to offer an olive branch. My client is willing to make a deal. He accepts that there were administrative errors. He is willing to plead to a misdemeanor count of mishandling funds. He will pay restitution to the named victims, including you and Mrs. Turner, if you agree to drop the civil suits and refuse to testify at the federal trial. He opened the briefcase. He didn't pull out papers. He pulled out a check. $200,000, he said, for your pain and suffering. You could repair this lovely historic home. You could travel. You could put this ugly chapter behind you. I looked at the check. It was more money than I had ever seen at one time. It was safety. It was comfort. I looked at Marcus Bellamy. Where did this money come from? I asked. He blinked. I beg your pardon? This money, I pointed to the check. Did he earn it? Or is this just more of what he stole from May Turner's retirement? Is this Sister Opal's heating bill money? Bellamy's smile faltered. The source of the funds is irrelevant. It is a settlement. It's relevant to me, I said. I stepped out onto the porch, looking him in the eye. You go back to your client, I said, my voice steady, and you tell him that I don't want his money, and I don't want a settlement. I want to see him in an orange jumpsuit standing before a judge and admitting what he did. Mrs. Hart, Bellamy warned, his voice dropping the pleasantries. If you go to trial, we will destroy your credibility. We will put your mental state on display, and we will make sure the jury thinks you are a confused, vindictive old woman. You can try, I said, but I have the truth, and truth is a stubborn thing. I slammed the door in his face. My hands were shaking, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the adrenaline of the fight. The trial began on March 15th, a blustery day when the wind whipped off the James River, rattling the windows of the federal courthouse. The courtroom was packed. The pews were filled, but not with supporters of the pastor, but with his victims. A sea of gray hair, sensible coats, and hardened faces. We sat together, a silent jury of our own. The prosecution was surgical. Lauren Pritchard didn't need theatrics. She had math. She projected the flowcharts Helena and I had built onto the massive screens. She showed the jury the path of every dollar, from the offering plate to the secret drawer, to the Samaritan Shell Company, and to the marina in Florida. Helena took the stand as an expert witness. She was brilliant. She dismantled the defense's claim of clerical errors with icy precision. Errors are random, she told the jury, adjusting her glasses. This was a system. You don't accidentally incorporate a shell company in Delaware 3 days after a major donation, and you don't accidentally buy a yacht. But the turning point wasn't the math. It was the voices. May Turner took the stand. She walked with a cane, looking frail, but when she raised her hand was steady. She told the jury about the office, about the pressure, and about the threat to her home. He told me I was investing in God's kingdom, May said, her voice cracking. He told me if I didn't give him the money, I was robbing the Lord. Then it was my turn. I sat in the witness box, looking across the room at Leonard Cross. He looked smaller without his pulpit. He glared at me, trying to summon that old intimidation, that touch not my anointed power. But the wire had broken the spell. They played the tape. The courtroom fell into a stunned silence as my recording filled the air. They heard his arrogance, heard him mocking the board, and heard him claim he answered to no one but the Almighty. And finally, they heard the violence, the struggle, the threat, and the sound of the heel stomp. Mrs. Hart, the prosecutor asked, "Why did you go back to that office?" I looked at the jury. Because he was counting on our silence, I said. He thought because we were old, because we were women, and because we were faithful, that we wouldn't fight back. He forgot that even sheep have teeth. The defense rested after 3 days. They didn't put Cross on the stand. They knew he would perjure himself in 5 minutes. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood up. He didn't look at Cross. Guilty, he read. Count 1, wire fraud, guilty. Count 2, money laundering, guilty. Count 3, conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty. 24 counts. 24 guilties that rang out like church bells. The sentencing hearing was held a week later. Judge Callahan, a stern woman with no patience for charlatans, looked over her spectacles at the man who had used God's name to buy a luxury Cadillac. "Mr. Cross," she said, her voice cutting through the room, "you are not a shepherd. You are a wolf who learned to wear wool. You preyed on the faith of the vulnerable, people who came to you for comfort in their grief, and you monetized their devotion." She paused, looking at the row of widows in the gallery. "You utilized scripture as a weapon of coercion," she continued. "And for that, there is only one penance this court can offer." She slammed the gavel down. 18 years in federal prison, immediate remand, all assets, including the properties in Florida and the Bahamas, are to be seized and liquidated for victim restitution. 2 U.S. Marshals stepped forward. They didn't ask him nicely. They grabbed his arms and pulled him from the defense table. For a moment, Cross tried to maintain his dignity. He straightened his tie. He looked back at the gallery, searching for a friendly face, searching for anyone who would still believe the lie. "This is persecution," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I am a servant of the Lord." "You're a convict," the marshal said, spinning him around. I watched as they cuffed his hands behind his back. The metal clicked shut. He looked terrified. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the realization that there were no luxury resorts where he was going, only concrete walls and silence. They dragged him through the side door, and the heavy wood closed behind him with a final thud. The courtroom exhaled. It was over. We walked out onto the courthouse steps into the bright Virginia afternoon. The fog had finally lifted, and the air was crisp and smelled of the river and blooming dogwood. The press was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. But I didn't want to talk to them. I turned to May. She was clutching a letter from the Victim Compensation Fund. It wasn't everything she had lost, and it never is, but it was enough to save her home. It was enough to start over. "He's gone," May whispered, leaning against me. "He can't hurt us anymore." "He never could," I said. "We just had to remember who we were." Nora was waiting for me. She hugged me tight, burying her face in my shoulder. "I'm so proud of you, Mom," she said. I looked down at my wrist. The skin was still pale where the silver bracelet had sat for those terrifying days. It was a ghost of the shackle I had worn, and a reminder of how easily faith can be weaponized. I rubbed the spot, feeling the pulse of my own blood underneath, steady and strong. I had lost the money Richard left me. I would never get all of that back. But I had saved something far more valuable. I had saved my dignity, and I had saved my community. They say doubt is a sin, but I learned the hard way that blind faith is far more dangerous. My name is Lucy Hart, and I know now that the devil doesn't always come with horns and a pitchfork. Sometimes he comes with a smile, a scripture, and a collection plate. But he made one fatal mistake. He forgot that the most dangerous creature in the world isn't the wolf. It's the woman who has nothing left to lose. If this story stirred something in you, please don't leave in silence. Your comment, your city, even a simple "I heard you" tells me I'm not just speaking into empty space. These voices, these lives deserve to be remembered. And if you feel moved to send a super thanks, know it's not just support, it's a way of saying these stories matter. I'll be waiting in the comments to hear from you. 2 more real-life journeys are right here on your screen. Let them keep you company. And if you haven't subscribed yet, maybe now's the moment. Until next time, with all my heart, thank you for listening.